Idaho Matters podcast is brought to you by St. Luke's On Demand Virtual Care, which allows patients to see a provider from their home using a computer or smartphone with on demand care for common ailments such as a cough, sore throat, or a sinus issue. More information at stlukesonline.org. Idaho lost more than 2,000 farms over a 5-year period. Idaho Matters wants to know how that's impacting farmers, cities, and counties. Listen to our series on farming called Land and Legacy. Episodes available on Monday afternoons through November 17th in the Idaho Matters podcast feed. From the studios of Boise State Public Radio News, I'm Gemma Cadet. This is Idaho Matters. A new novel filled with love, loss, and the supernatural is hitting bookstores this fall. Author Isabel Cañas, who's known for weaving history and horror into haunting page turners, is back with her latest novel. It's called The Possession of Alba Diaz. Now, this new story blends gothic suspense with rich cultural lore, and it really takes readers on a journey where family secrets and restless spirits are colliding. We're lucky enough to have Isabel joining us today to talk more about this. Isabel, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's begin by you giving us kind of a quick um, rundown of what the book is about.
Yeah, so The Possession of Alba Diaz is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a story about Alba Diaz and how, spoiler alert, she gets possessed by a demon. The book opens in 1765 in the northern Mexican city of Zacatecas, which was the heart of the silver mining industry in the time that Mexico was a colony of Spain. And a plague starts creeping through the city. And so Alba and her fiance Carlos flee the city up to his family's Hacienda de Minas, that is their mining home in the mountains, to stay away. It's very Mask of the Red Death, if you will. Like, we're going to flee the plague, up into the mountains we go. And once they get there, two things happen. First, Alba meets or becomes better acquainted with Carlos's cousin, a new immigrant from Spain named Elias, who is bad news because he's a bad boy. And she also starts to experience sleepwalking episodes, strange hallucinations. She gets lost in the mine, and things start to unfurl from there, and it gets spookier and spookier.
What first sparked the idea for this book?
Well, I actually think I can trace it back to being, I guess you could say, ensorcelled by
Mm.
mercury, the element. Quicksilver is so is so shiny, and is not
Uh-huh.
shininess a core part of my creative process? It is something that has, it is so difficult to define and is so difficult to pin down and has such a luster in low light. I, as an artist, am somebody who is very drawn um, to lightness and darkness, shadows. Honestly, if you could have seen the copy edited pages of The Hacienda, my first novel, when it came back to me, the copy editor was like, "You said the word darkness 85 times in this manuscript.
Oh my
Could we
goodness.
pare it back just a little bit?" I'm very drawn to color and light, and so when I start to think of a novel idea, and the ideas start to coalesce around a theme or around a character or a setting, my mind naturally starts to shade things in. And in this case, I knew I wanted to write a book set in a silver mine because um, my previous novels have each had pretty strong speculative elements like the haunted house, the vampire. And so for
Mm.
demonic possession, it's something, demonic possession is a speculative conceit that is so internalized and so embodied that I knew I could take that particular idea and plant it anywhere in space and time. So where was I going to put it? The
Mm.
answer was the 18th century, which spooked my publisher because it is a little earlier than my other books. But it made perfect
Yeah.
sense to me because, having been trained as a historian, I was kind of following the money. When it came to the boom and bust cycles of the silver mining
Mm.
industry in Nueva España, that is the colony of New Spain, I there are certain peaks and valleys that I gravitated towards where people had money, and there was a sense of precarity where there was a sense that you could lose it all if your mine collapsed or flooded, or the price of mercury, the tax on mercury went up. and suddenly you were ruined. I love that juxtaposition of opulence and nothingness, of luxury, and we could lose it all tomorrow. It just fits, it suits the Gothic so well. So, color, light, money, these are all very Gothic elements that started to mesh together to make the origins of the possession of Alba Diaz.
So, did you? I mean, you said you're trained as a historian. So, did you draw on any
Mhm.
like real historical events or maybe folklore um,
I
for those
did.
more supernatural elements? Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So for real world elements and occurrences, there were different waves of hemorrhagic fevers that swept Mexico at different points in its history that were incredibly devastating. I think by now we're all very familiar with the fact that when Europeans came to North and South America, they came bearing a lot of bugs that people living on
Mm-hmm.
those continents had not encountered before, and that caused enormous waves of devastation for indigenous peoples. And they didn't just happen at the time of conquest, like when Christopher Columbus came, when Hernan Cortez came to Mexico. Yes, he came with contagion, if you will, but that continued over the centuries. And so Matlazahuatl was a word that referred to different waves of fever that struck central and northern Mexico over the centuries. Historians are not exactly sure what disease in particular it was, or even if it did refer to a specific disease. But what they are sure of is that it caused devastation and it was
Mm.
contagious. And so when it came to the setting of this novel, I knew I needed a reason to drive Alba and her family out of the city of Zacatecas up into the mountains toward the silver mine where glorious, spooky things await. And a plague was the perfect element. So there are different waves of plague that struck over the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, and I borrowed from the historical record and placed it in this particular year for my particular use.
So, Alba to me is such a compelling protagonist. How did you really develop her character?
Oh, thank you. All of my characters are sharp shards from inside me. I
Mm.
weave bits of my soul into every single one of my characters, my protagonists most of all. Alba sprang from a place of fierce yearning for autonomy from my adolescence and from my present.
Mm.
From my adolescence, in that I was raised in a very religious household. Um, I was raised in Opus Dei, which is a particular part of the Catholic Church that is
Mm-hmm.
very conservative and honestly quite controlling when it comes to women's bodies. And I fought and I fought and I fought to be free of that when I was younger. I was a pretty mouthy, rebellious teenager, and I really wanted to be free of that. I say from the present because this is the first novel that I've written in the wake of losing Roe v. Wade, and also the first novel that I wrote in the after having given birth. And I wrote
Mm.
it while I was in the midst of my second pregnancy, actually. So I was acutely aware in the time that I was writing this novel of how frankly dangerous it is to be in a childbearing body. How much can go wrong? How much is out of your control at any given point? I found myself being pregnant in a state where I knew that it was going to end at some point, and I didn't
Mm-hmm.
know when, and I didn't know how. And that loss of control, the fact that I was ceding control over something that had always been wholly in my control before, was deeply frightening. And now I know that in like 10, 15 years, my son is going to look back on these interviews and be like, gee, mom, you really loved being pregnant with me so much that you wrote a book about checks notes demonic possession. But it's true. I didn't make this connection until long after the book had been sent to the printer, but I
Mm-hmm.
think it is absolutely your reaction to being in the midst of a pregnancy that was not going according to plan, that was a bit scary at times. And, it went off to copy edits exactly 1 week before my son was born. So it's a snapshot, if you will, of that point in time where I
Mm.
was frightened by and grieving a seismic shift in our society and how people in childbearing bodies navigate the medical system in this country. And then
Mm.
also my own personal life. So it's interesting how each novel that I've written, and every novel that anybody writes, is a snapshot of a particular moment in time. But I wrote this book so quickly that it really is like a crisp image of who I was and the world I was living in when I wrote it.
Mm. You know, it's interesting with everything you just said because, possession can mean so many things, right? I mean, there
Mm-hmm.
can be a literal possession, there can be emotional, right? I mean, you talked about the confines of growing up in a very religious household, right?
Mm-hmm.
Even cultural possession. So,
Mm-hmm.
how did you play with those layers in the book? And I guess, was it even conscious? Because you said you wrote the book so fast.
At first it was not conscious. You're right. I did write the book really fast, and I knew initially that there was going to be a play off of um, possession as in demonic possession and possession as in who gets to possess Alba the person. But it became even more layered with each round of revision that I did. And I think the title became a part of that as well. For listeners who are not aware, sometimes the title is a collaboration between the publisher and the author. I sold my first novel with a title that is not, pasted across the front cover. My second novel, Vampires of El Norte, that's a title that came after many rounds of, volleying ideas back and forth with my editor because it's as much a sales and marketing decision as it is an artistic decision. And so I was, color me shocked when I sent a list of potential titles over to my editor. The Possession of Alba Diaz was at the very top, and that one was the one that top brass at my publisher were like, yes, that's it. And I was
Mm.
gifted that. I was given that as a gift, really, when I was in the middle of revising the book. And I think it deepened that theme of possession. Who gets to possess Alba? There's so many people who are fighting over her literal body, her soul, her place in society. And there's a moment, um, I'd say like 70 or 80% into the book, where she's having a heated conversation with Elias, who's the other point of view character in the novel. And she says, "Give me something that is mine." And I think that
Mm.
is a really important moment for her because that's all she wants is something that is hers. She would prefer that to be her person in society. That's why she gets engaged to Carlos at the beginning of the novel in the first place. She decides to make a deal with the devil she knows rather than the devil, marrying some other stranger. She prefers to um, lock herself down with, even though she doesn't want to get married, she knows she has to in order to get out of her parents' house and find a place in society. And so, I think, yeah, it was the title that led me to revise that theme deeper and deeper and deeper. And it really does, it's like Mercury, it shifts in the light depending on which way you look at
Mm.
it.
It's so interesting because so many of the themes you've talked about during our conversation are themes that women have been fighting with and struggling for and demanding to have voice, demanding to have autonomy, right? It
Mm-hmm.
feels like from the beginnings of history. Uh,
Yeah.
So again, as you were writing this, I mean, was all of that kind of coming up, or was it when you were done and it went off to the publisher? You're like, oh, like, kind of that aha moment of these are struggles that frankly all women face.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's a mix. It was a mix of the two. One thing I don't want to say struggle with, but it's something that comes to the fore when I'm wrestling with a new novel idea every single time I write a historical novel is I want to strike a balance between what would be historically air quotes accurate for my
Mm.
character and what reads as authentic to contemporary readers. Sometimes those are two different things. There are two things I want to avoid. One is the character in a historical novel who feels so out of touch with the contemporary reader and their concerns that their arc doesn't interest the reader or alienates them, even worse. And two, I also really want to avoid a character in a historical setting who feels too modern, who you can tell just by their voice or how they're thinking about the world. Like, this person has seen the screen of a phone. I don't care if this book is taking place in 1765. This person is modern. I want to avoid that because historical fiction is an escapist genre. You want to be swept away by a story in a place that's far away from here. In that way, it's very similar to fantasy or even science fiction in my mind,
Mm.
because it's an escape route for the reader. And so, in crafting my heroines in across my three novels, I have sought to strike a balance between the historical and the contemporary. And what I have found is that that balance isn't actually all that difficult to strike when the themes that are uh, and hurdles that keep cropping up in our contemporary setting echo the past so powerfully. We're
Mm.
stuck in this loop where we're fighting the same battle over and over again. And I find myself writing my way through it.
Mm. Before I let you go, what kind of reaction, I guess, are you hoping readers have to this newest novel?
I hope I hope readers find escapism in it, because don't we all need a little bit of that right now? I
Mm-hmm.
hope they find themselves swept away, but I also hope that they leave this novel with a balm to the soul and the knowledge that even in the most dire of circumstances, you do have control over your own life.
I want to thank you so much for taking time to talk with us. What a wonderful conversation. We've been speaking with author Isabel Cañas about her new novel, The Possession of Alva Diaz. This is the Idaho Matters podcast. I'm Gemma Gaudette.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.